remove, oh, see now we have share 7. And what I wanted to do is remove that completely, so fortunately I sometimes have the power to get rid of things and make them disappear. So we have Karen's PowerPoint ready at the top left of our screen. You will hear from Karen and sometimes from myself, but mostly from Karen. My role is just to introduce the webinar, and for those who have just joined us, I'm Josephine and I'm working from my office in Burlington. I'm the webinar coordinator for EDGE and moderate most of the webinars that we do as well. And if you'd like to engage with us in the webinar, we invite you to do so by typing your comments and questions into the chat pod below as the webinar is in progress. I know that Karen plans to stop to take questions at the end and perhaps in the middle. I can't quite remember what we agreed there, but I'll let Karen lead on that. And we will save the questions and comments that you have, and feel free to type them in as you think of them so you don't forget them, but we will certainly come to them at the right time. Karen has a number of handouts available for us tonight, and in a moment I will let her introduce what each of them is. And when she does that, I'll invite you to save them to your computer, so you'll notice at the right side of your screen a little pod that says Files for Karen with 4 different files. You can highlight, click on one of the files and save that to your computer. So I'm now going to introduce Karen. And Karen is in Orillia. She works at St. Paul's United Church in Orillia, where she's been for, I believe, 17 years, or is it more
Actually,
than 17?
It's about 16 and a half now. Yeah.
16 and a half. That's quite a long time, and I know you've had extensive experience leading small group ministry there. You've been a minister on the staff team of St. Paul's in Orillia since January '96, that's right, and have had an average of 25 small groups each year. You've also actively been involved in developing and supporting pastoral care teams of 130 people, as well as developing and implementing the concept of ministry activation through which people are supported and encouraged to use their gifts and live into their passions, as together we share who we authentically are, to creatively give space for the Spirit to flow through us to touch the world with the power of creative love. And Karen, we're excited to hear from you tonight. One comment I'd just like all the participants to be aware of is that Karen is also working with Steve Fetter, who coordinates the United in Learning program, which has some aims that are a little bit different than EDGE does, but he has some similar technology. And I know that you'll be leading a learning circle with Steve through the United in Learning program, and that's a 6 weeks of more in-depth exploration of the topic that you will be introducing tonight from October 29th to December 3rd on Monday afternoons at 1 p.m. So you'll have to go, I believe, to the unitedinlearning.com website to register for that if you are interested. I'll type that in below. And other than that, I'll turn this over to you and say once again, thank you, Karen, and welcome to this webinar.
Thank you very much, Josephine. Hi, everyone. This is so great to be together for this next hour to reflect on small group culture that creates circles of transformation where people's lives are cracked open and the Spirit has space to move in new and creative ways. In this webinar, I want to mainly focus on the more subtle nuances that can help to create the atmosphere that can lead to small groups being significant in the lives of participants and in the life of the church. These are insights that we have learned often by making very significant mistakes over the past 16 years here at St. Paul's in Orillia. The webinar also includes some gatherings of wisdom and quotes from others. Some of you have been at the day-long workshops that I've offered for creating small groups, healthy small groups. Some of you have been at the hour-long workshops that I've done at More Than Franchises and Renovations 2000. Some of you have lots of experiences with small groups, and for others this will be a first time. And so as much as I don't want to, I do intend to look more at the nuances tonight, I do want to give a framework to speak about these nuances and insights. And so I will include a quick overview of the components of small groups. The resources that Josephine has spoken about that are available to download, there's 4 of them there under the title of Files for Karen. They cover a lot of details about small group ministry, as well as what I'll be sharing tonight. Though we have discovered that small groups really need to be experienced rather than just talked about at a conceptual level. Martha Grace Reese has discovered that in her work as well. I'll be talking about that a little bit later, but she's discovered that as well. Small groups is something that you just invite people to come and gently begin and see what the experience is like, and in experiencing it, people discover how powerful it can be, and it's out of that experience that it begins to grow. So, with that in mind, that small groups are best explored experientially, I am offering a learning circle for the 6 weeks starting the week of October 29th, and it will provide experiential engagement with the components of small group ministry as we create a small group that will be an opportunity to reflect on and discuss small group culture. As for our time together tonight as it unfolds, I invite you to take note of anything that catches your attention, things that will be takeaways for you, and we'll share those later on, as well as gathering up any comments and questions that you might have. But before we delve into the material, I'd like to invite us to enter into a moment of centering ourselves. And I invite you to do that however you would normally do it, or you can follow along with me. So I invite you just to get comfortable, and you might find it best to close your eyes if that makes it easier for you to center. And notice where your point of consciousness is. It's often there behind your forehead. And begin to let your point of consciousness travel down deep toward the very center of your being. And as you travel down, you might experience it as traveling down a staircase or a hillside. And as you go down toward the very center of your being, notice if you're carrying any baggage, and set that baggage down just for now. You can come back and get it later, and continue down the hillside or the stairs, less encumbered. And as you go down a little bit further, notice again if you're carrying any baggage, and set it down just for now, knowing you can come back later and get it. And so as unencumbered as you are able to, I invite you now to come to the bottom of that and walk into a place of light. And in that place of light, you hear words whispered to you that speak to a longing that's deep in your heart. You are beloved. You are beloved. Let that sink into the very marrow of your bones. Let it fill any place of longing or woundedness that's within you. Let it delight you with joy. And now walk beyond that place of light to a beautiful, expansive place. And as you do, you see others coming toward you, and everyone is forming in a circle together, and you feel how good it is to be in community. And those people in your mind's eye are the others that are here tonight connected, and those who will come and be part of this webinar at later times. And we look upon each other with eyes of love. We bring all our energies to this moment, surrounding any other place, past, present, future, with light, so that we can simply be here in this moment. Now, when you're ready, I invite you to open your eyes and continue to feel that sense of being beloved and the wonderful sense of blessing that comes from connection in community. So, we'll start with a quick overview of the components of small groups. Oops. Oh, there's the learning circle information. Missing my cues here. Oh, and there's the meditation. Okay, here's the overview of the components of small groups. So here at St. Paul's, we've used this language of PALS, which stands for Prayer, Action, Learning, and Sharing. I believe that it may come from the work of Tom Bandy, who I know is doing a webinar later. The two key letters in that are the first one and the last one, prayer and sharing. They're absolutely key to small groups being transformative. So you'll hear lots about those later on. The learning component that's listed in this acronym, we've learned that an incredible amount of learning arises from the wisdom of a gathered group who connect at a significant level, and that the focus of learning of a small group really becomes the thing that draws people together. So we want to offer things that will connect people or excite them about being part of a group with a particular topic, but in many ways that topic, a key part of it is to draw them together, to pray and to share. The action component of PALS, we learn the hard way that if a group becomes very focused on action together, they can lose sight of praying and sharing together. So they become more like a working team than a small group, which is good too, but it's not a small group. The focus on action that we've developed is to encourage people to live the learnings from the small group in their day-to-day lives, whether it's intentionally finding more joy for the people that have been part of the Joy Diet group, or adding time for meditation for those who are part of the prayer meditation group. But then, to be accountable to the group, to share how you're doing with those particular practices. And then the group can periodically be involved in some larger action together. So, a couple of quick things. There's a wide variety of small groups, all an excuse to gather people with like interest so that there's time to deepen in the spiritual journeys. Pass the popcorn, please. That's a movie night. One-to-one, that's for people who have been married and are separated. So try to find catchy names when we can. Oops, what did I do? Thank you. Small groups are led by trained and supported lay people, as well as by clergy. So to support lay people, what we have developed over the years is an annual leadership retreat for a full weekend, plus 3 gatherings a year of a dinner together. We originally wanted to try to do it on a weekly basis, but in those early years we had so many small groups running that we could never find an evening to do it. So we've spread it out a little bit more. But small group leaders always have good access to have one-on-one support by clergy, and not just support for small groups, but support for their own spiritual well-being, because if they're going to be a leader and facilitator, they need to be in a good place. So following the wisdom of Jesus, groups range in size from 3 to 12. Jesus' small group was 12. Commitment is absolutely critical to small groups, so it needs to be a high priority if significant community is to be created. So that commitment is really important. So we've discovered that there's a lot of wisdom to run groups that last for 7 to 9 weeks, then end with an evaluation and a potluck and start again, and people are able to make higher commitment to that. So it's important to notice if someone's not there, so people know that it matters if you're not there. Agree that people will let someone know if they can't be there, and if you don't know why someone's not there, arrange for someone to contact them. So small groups always do include the opportunity for sharing, which happens in a simple way through check-in. In check-in, people are talking about their own lives, and they're the experts on their own lives, and so there's a deeper comfort level around that. And those check-ins, there's a wide variety of options. We'll talk about some of those a little later. The toolbox of resources actually has quite a number of options and suggestions around that. Do include an intentional closing. An example that we use often is we have people stand around the candle at the end and name a blessing that they claim for themselves and offer to each other. It could be as simple as be open to laughter in the coming week. Do create a covenant together. We'll talk more about that later. Here's a quick example of a covenant that was shared at a More Than Franchise workshop that was sponsored, More Than Franchise sponsored by Edge. It was done at a workshop that Barbara Lloyd was at, but I don't know if this is actually her work. But it's respect spelled out, inviting people to take responsibility for what they say and feel, use empathetic listening, be sensitive to differences in communication styles, ponder what you hear and feel before you speak, examine your own assumptions and expectations, keep confidentiality, trust ambiguity, because we are not here to debate who is right or wrong. So I think I saw somewhere that somebody was asking who's Martha Grace Reese. I'll actually show her book in a little while and talk about why I would recommend it to you. Martha Grace Reese has done some significant research around empowering people to be sharing their stories and grounding that in a prayerful lifestyle. So she talks about the importance of creating opportunities for things like small groups for deepening connection. This is one of her quotes. She says that typical mainline church members have not experienced enough consistent disciplined prayer, emotional, spiritual, intellectual sharing with other church members, or unifying church experiences. It's only been recently that I've had the time to become fully aware of the actually well-developed and clear foundational concepts that support the deepening of people's spiritual journey within our small groups here at St. Paul's. There really is a small group culture, although it's not the only place that it's seen, but there really is a small group culture. It becomes a culture that's like a dress rehearsal for how we'll be in the world. For small groups that are transformative, call forth the best of who we are. They encourage us to trust our own wisdom, to share our stories of faith, and to give of ourselves in the world by bringing an alternative vision of wholeness into all that we do, so that we make a positive difference in the world by being and acting as a presence of compassion, love, and hope. As I have prepared for this webinar, I've re-listened to some earlier webinars. In one, John Pentland shared a quote about meaning by Mark Kingswell, and it was one of my takeaways from that particular seminar. Mark says that what gives meaning in life is creative leisure, connection to family and friends, commitment to a community social project, and time to reflect. Now, as you look at all four of those, weave this thought into them. Each of these can be deepened by small groups. Some points more than others, depending on the focus of small groups. In another Edge webinar, Ross Lockhart invited us to reflect on the importance of expectations in worship. Do we expect God to show up and transform lives? Well, in small groups, that's a central foundational concept, that we do expect God, including the power of God within us, to show up and transform lives. Ross quoted Tom Long, who says something that I love. I've referred to it a moment ago, that worship is a dress rehearsal for speaking faithfully in the rest of our lives. And small groups, in my experience, are also like a dress rehearsal for speaking and living faithfully in the rest of our lives. Ross spoke about the important impact of people sharing their testimonies in public worship. In our experiences at St. Paul's, one of the key places that people discover that they have something of their own to say about their faith and their experience of God in their lives is in small groups. The work that Martha Grace Reese has done, there you go, there's her book. You've probably seen it piled up all over the place. It provides us with some great resources. It was first introduced to many of us by Rob Dalgleish through Edge. Her books, Unbinding the Gospel, and Your Heart, and Unbinding Your Soul, those combined are a fully developed program that I would recommend as a great way to get people really talking about their faith and creating transformative small group culture. It includes faith sharing as well as a significant commitment to prayer. The key concept that has developed as foundation for small group ministry here is one that was shared with me in the spring of 1986 when I did my first week of guided prayer during my internship at Harcourt in Guelph. Now there's another great resource, Week of Guided Prayer. You can get connected to that through the Hamilton Conference website. My prayer companion that spring was a nun. She shared a diagram with me that has informed my faith journey and my ministry ever since. She shared with me that our lives are like 3 circles. A small circle in the center, a medium-sized circle next, and then the largest circle at the outside. Somewhat seen here on the stone that I found on the pilgrimage at Iona this summer. The small inner circle, it represents who we are as a beloved child of God. It's right at the very core of our being, there where we remember that we are beloved, that we are gifted, and that we are an amazing being of light. Like the story of Jesus' baptism, there at the center, we too hear God say, "You are my beloved." When we resonate with knowing that we are beloved, then we are connecting to that place of the small circle, or the place at the very deep core of our being. The next circle out, the medium middle circle, represents all the stuff in our lives that we've learned or experienced. This circle is filled with external expectations that can actually cover over and smother the wisdom of the inner circle. The middle circle is often filled with shoulds. We know that, and we can tell that if we are engaging life from that circle, we can tell that we're engaging life from that circle when we are shoulding on ourselves or on others. And then the largest circle is all the stuff all around us in life that at this point is just out there circling around us. Now, what my prayer companion observed is that much of the time we live our lives in that middle circle, trying to live up to the expectations of what we think we should be doing, leaving little or no space to listen to the whisper of the Spirit or the wisdom within that longs to be heard. For example, it is when people are coming from this middle circle that we hear people blaming others. In the middle circle, it's about us and them, or me and them, rather than we. So the nugget of insight that my prayer companion shared is that the primary focus of the spiritual journey is to seek to live out of the center circle, to build our capacity to connect to God and higher self. What I now understand is that that's a fairly classical definition of spirituality that I was able to recognize in this symbol. In that center circle, we are connected to our authentic self, connected to the divine, to the God power within us and beyond us. Imagine the way the world will be as more and more we plug into that source of deep love within us. When we begin to build our capacity to connect to that center place, we might begin only feeling that connection for 10 seconds at a time. But with practice, usually aided by meditation, that time may well grow to 60 seconds, and then eventually to hours at a time, even days at a time, as our primary place of response to the world. Once that happens, we then learn to notice quickly when we get caught in the middle circle, where fear lives and grows, and we can choose a different path. So when we're connected to that inner place of being, we connect and express the gifts of the Spirit of patience, kindness, joy, peace, love, generosity, as well as creativity and passionate insights. We become part of bringing peace to the planet by making space for peace in our lives. When our activities are soul-directed from that center circle, or spirit-directed, since it is there in that center place that we connect to Spirit, then our activities are an expression of our higher purpose, which is always about wholeness, deep peace, and well-being of all. I now expand the diagram to include other circles of 3 that represent other people, and how, when we are in our place of center, living out of that dynamic energy of love, living out of our own authenticity, then we find ourselves connecting with others at their place of center. We respond to others with the awareness that at the center of who they are is a place of light and love, even if they are not aware of it. When 2 or more people are aware that they are connected to the power of God in whatever way people experience God, at the center of who they are, then a heart-to-heart connection is experienced, eternal energy to eternal energy. And that's one of the major things we try to create space for in small group experiences here. It's when that happens that small groups are so rewarding and transformative. As Margaret Wheatley says in her book, Finding Our Way, Leadership in Uncertain Times, she says that in the new story, we discover a world where life gives birth to itself, using 2 powerful forces: the need to be free, to create one's self, and the need to reach out for relationships with others. These forces never disappear from life. Even if we deny them, we can't ever extinguish them. They are always active, even in the most repressive human organizations. Life can never stop asserting its need to create itself, and life never stops searching for connection. In creating safe and encouraging space for that connection of authenticity to authenticity, God's transforming power shows up in amazing ways, and people begin to experience transformation. We've seen it over and over again in our small groups. People discovering God, people connecting to their true self and shifting from being victims, people experiencing the blessing of community, people being empowered and encouraged to share their story of hope and to share their gifts in the world. I think I'm just going to glance over here for a moment as I draw that part of our time. This is where I thought I could pause if I needed to pause. Just looking over at the questions, and I think they're technical enough we can wait for them later. What do you think, Josephine?
Yeah, Karen, there are just a couple of technical questions. Anne asked, is this in the handouts? And Anne, I apologize, I don't quite remember what this was referring to, so perhaps if you could type that out, then Karen, you could answer that question at the end of the webinar.
Okay, I can do that.
And then the second one was about the PowerPoint, whether there would be an opportunity to make either the entire PowerPoint or some of the images or quotes available afterwards to those who would like them. So maybe you can just think about those while you're doing all of your presentation and respond at the
Okay.
end.
And has anybody been gathering up any takeaways yet? Have we seen any of those? Anything that's particularly speaking to people? Or is it more technical in?
Just those technical questions at the
Okay.
moment.
Well, keep looking for those takeaways if anything jumps out at you. So, then to continue on with the reflections, I'll just share with you that during this past year, many of our small groups used a question at the beginning of each gathering that's had a profound effect on lives. The question is simple, and it actually is one that came from the opening day of Edge. Rob and I had talked earlier in the summer, and I knew that it was coming, and I was quite caught by it. So we practiced it and tried it out for quite a while. The question is simply, where have you seen spirit sightings? So where have you seen God moving, or the power of love or insight at work in your life or in the world around you since we last met? People became quite astute at repeatedly seeing and identifying on a day-to-day basis where and when God was showing up and giving insights and transforming lives and prompting us toward the wholeness that we're called toward. The question also provides an opportunity for people to share key moments of both joys and sorrows, which is critical if people are going to be present to and supportive of one another. Our adult inquiry group this year decided to reflect on the process of spirit sightings for their sermon time in their service in April. Well, many of us found it very powerful, but one person in particular told me right after the service that this concept, this idea of spirit sightings, of recognizing the multitude of moments when a higher power shows up, allowed him to go back and re-look at the past decade of his life, to see it radically differently. For the first time, he saw some of the ways he was led to make choices that opened up a whole new life for him that he had not seen as a blessing until that moment. The next week, one of his family members thanked me for being part of bringing him back, waking him up. It was a journey from despair to hope, a shift to being able to see the good and the light around him and within him that he'd lost sight of. Practicing spirit sightings. It's a simple invitation that helps people to see things differently. The sharing of spirit sightings is an opportunity for people, though, to tell their story and speak of their faith as it is reflected in their own experience. So they are testifying to how they experience God, which is what Ross had spoken of in my earlier quote. They are practicing sharing their faith, which is what Martha Grace Reese's book seeks to help people to do. So it's built into the very culture of small groups. Creating a covenant or agreement around how we will be in community together is a key part of developing the ethos of small groups that invites this level of sharing. Well, there are many concepts that are important to include in a covenant. Probably the most critical topic to discuss, not surprisingly, is confidentiality. And we've discovered, the hard way, that it is important to unpack what each particular group means by confidentiality. I remember in the third Women in Transition small group that I facilitated, I completely forgot about creating a covenant. It was in the very early months of doing small groups. I completely forgot about doing a covenant or having any in-depth conversation about confidentiality, which was really too bad considering that we had a huge influx of women from the wider community in that group. So as facilitator, I was struggling to get the group to go to a deeper level. It was week 3 before I realized what I had forgotten. Once we agreed on how we would be in community together, including our understanding of confidentiality, things slowly shifted and sharing at a deeper level began. but it really does need to come right at the beginning of the conversation. So in the early years, once we remembered to do covenants, we learned to discuss confidentiality with greater detail to ensure that each group understood what it was for themselves, but partly because people adhered to it so rigidly that small groups were being experienced by others being like secret societies. Nothing was being shared. So we became much clearer. It was just other people's stories that are not yours to tell. In recent years, we have explored using Parker Palmer's concept of double confidentiality, which basically means that outside of circle time, a group member would not initiate a conversation with another member about something they had shared in the circle. So I won't go to you and start talking to you about something that you had shared in the circle. When someone shares something in a circle, if they want to talk further about it, they are the ones who are to bring it up at a time and a place of their choice. One thing we've learned over the years is that it's important to acknowledge that we have a covenant every time we meet. We first learned this from a very high-energy, quirky, creative 8-year-old when our Sunday school groups were all based on the small group models. So long as he agreed to the covenant, every time he would honor it. Otherwise, he simply didn't. So we use a simple process at the beginning of each gathering. We invite people to offer their name into the center of the circle, and then we kind of summarize the key components of the covenant. And it'll look different sort of every time we say it, but it's something like this. I invite you to offer your name into the center of the circle if you are willing to be together in such a way that we respect ourselves, respect each other, seek to be open to the Spirit, that we'll listen with open hearts, not fix each other, honor our agreement around confidentiality, so that together we create a safe, nourishing, life-giving space where we can be the fullness of who we are. And so if you agree to be in community with each other in this way, I invite you to offer your name into the circle. Once everyone has put their name into the circle, the candle is usually lit. I remember once saying to small group leaders that creating an altar, which could be as simple as a candle, is not a significant component of small groups. We discovered that I was actually very wrong. While there may be some groups where a candle doesn't work, like our soul-to-soul walking group, having a lit candle, even if it's lit before people arrive, identifies the time as intentional and special. This is a time apart, a time to reflect, a time to connect and be together in a different and deeper way. So along with the opportunity to share together, the other key component of small group culture is to pray together or to meditate together. The greatest impact happens when our praying together is participatory, and it can be as simple as or as profound as inviting people to respond to the question, what do you feel gratitude for? Name any concerns you have, or people or situations you would like surrounded by support. Share something that you long for or hope for. Offer words or images you would use to describe the divine as we open ourselves to the presence of God amongst us. And any time a leader asks a question like that, the leader actually is invited to answer first, to model what it is that we are intending by that question. Trusting that it is a safe place to offer our contribution, if we have one, around our gratitude, concerns, longings, and our sense of God, encourages us to start to speak about the things that matter to us. Meditation is a very powerful way to help people connect to the place of wisdom within. Dr. Elizabeth DeBold calls meditation the ultimate spiritual practice, saying, meditation is a practice of transformative spirituality. Why? Because it challenges who we are at the most foundational level. discovering a different ground of self rather than our conditioned sense of need, control, insecurity, or the thousands of ways we are looking for anything outside ourselves to validate who we are and give us direction and purpose. Discovering that different ground of self is essential. It's essential if we want to transform, and through our transformation, shatter the world that we know has to change at its core. In a course that I took with Craig Hamilton on Awakening the Evolutionary Self, the central practice named to awaken people was meditation. The goal of the course was to provide a step-by-step process to help people discover the profound life of meaning and purpose that comes from aligning with the creative force of evolution. Aligning with the creative force of evolution, which Craig said often in the course is simply what many people call God. So this central aspect of aligning self with God that was being taught was meditation. And it was being taught in a non-religious group of over 1,000 people from all over the world. Meditation in a small group provides another whole level of conversation. In small groups here at St. Paul's, we often share what has happened in our meditation or what insight arose from taking that time to center and reflect and connect. It provides us with experience to learn to trust what is within us rather than looking to others to guide us or affirm us. With that kind of in-depth sharing, a critical piece in small group culture is to ensure that whatever people share is honored. So, no one tries to fix another, or correct them, or trump them with another story. We honor them by listening and letting the experience be theirs. Now, if someone has tears, we've developed a practice that is actually very hard for a lot of people, but we find it works in positive ways, and we now flow with it quite comfortably. So when there are tears, we agree that no one will move into that person's space to comfort them with a hug or a pat on the arm or even with a tissue, unless they indicate they want one. We simply hold the sacred space we are sharing and not interrupt the depth of what is being experienced. And afterwards, if people are not able to speak and share what's happening to them, we simply ask them what we could do that they would find helpful. So we are intentional about encouraging people to listen deeply to each other and also listen deeply to ourselves. So we invite people to share their own stories and thoughts by speaking from the responsible I. You've probably heard of this in other places. I feel, what I've experienced is, I think, I wonder, I've discovered that. There is still a tendency in the pattern of our culture's conversations to use you, even when we're telling our own stories. You feel sad when. You know you need to change when. It's hard for you when. Using you when you are actually speaking about yourself does three things that we've discovered are unhelpful. One, it distances us from our own story. Secondly, it can suggest that your experience or understanding or perspective is the same as everyone else's, and people can end up in major mental debates with you about that. And thirdly, when we first learned about using the responsible I instead of you, one person shared that the shift to I was huge, because it took her out of her analytical and detached head and dropped her into her heart, where she connected more fully and more deeply to her own story or insight. Speaking from the I perspective creates greater possibility of heart-to-heart connections. So, how do we share all these concepts? Well, sometimes we talk about them at the time when we're building the covenant. Sometimes it happens partway through a group when we offer a strategy that we invite people to try because it's been powerful for others. And the culture seems to pass on with some real ease as people who have experienced it model it through others, for others. So through participation in small groups, we see people develop the ability to really listen, to claim their own story and wisdom and to share that in the wider community, to see the goodness in themselves and others, to trust that they're not alone, that there's a God power there for them as well as a wider community that supports them. It also encourages them to know that their unique gifts and self need to be shared in the world to add to the deep peace for which we all long. We see people evolve into the fullness of who they are and to discover pathways that honor who they are. Andrew Cohen speaks of that kind of experience in his work to help people evolve. He says, as a spiritual teacher who teaches a new kind of evolutionary enlightenment, participating in and contributing to the process of emergence in consciousness and culture is literally what I live for. In fact, all of my energy is devoted singularly to catalyzing higher emergence in the souls, minds, and personalities of those who are interested in my work. What does that look like? At the level of soul, it looks like the sudden presence of a depth in which we feel emotionally connected to the enormity of the universe, the significance of knowing we're alive, and a powerful sense of responsibility to not waste the precious time we have to be the person we are right now. At the level of mind, it looks like an awakening of new capacities of intelligence as our thoughts become animated by our awareness of the infinite. Because of this, we're able to embrace complexity, see subtlety, and appreciate nuance in ways unimaginable. And at the level of the personality, it looks like lightness of being. Enlightenment expressed through the human personality is lightness of being, because now we no longer take our psychological selves so seriously. We know that is only a small part of who we really are. When these profound qualities emerge in the soul, mind, and personality of any individual, it is delight beyond words. Circles of transformation don't only change us. The changes in us impacts the world around us. As Marianne Williamson said, personal transformation can and does have global effects. As we go, so goes the world, for the world is us. Then she suggests that the revolution that will save the world is ultimately a personal one. For that transformation to happen, though, at a personal level, we need community, as we hear in the wisdom from Bruce Lipton. He writes, saying, when we break up the individuals from a community into individual units, they become disempowered, because it's the collective consciousness and the collective energy of the group from which power comes. The principal driving force that lies before us is that we have to recognize the nature of community as the evolutionary step which we just took a step backwards from in the last century. Margaret Mead's well-known quote, never doubt that a small group of committed people can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. And we're called to be the change we want to see in the world. We need to figure out ways to do that. And Jesus, of course, said that I have come that you may have life and have it abundantly. But he also said that we will do even greater things than he has done because of the power of the Holy Spirit that is with us. We can do amazing things when connected to who we are called to be, connected to God, and connected to each other in healthy ways. I had another experience here about we space, but I'm conscious of time, Josephine, so I want you to give me your wisdom on this. It's a meditation that's about 5 minutes and then Rob's quote. So what's your sense?
Yeah, I think, well, why don't we poll the group? If you look at the top of your screen, you'll see the little figure with the raised hand, and there's a little arrow to the right. If you click on that and perhaps click agree for check mark, if you're okay with spending 5 minutes on a meditation. I think we're okay. We don't have too many questions, Karen. I think those can be dealt with in the remaining 5 minutes if that works for you. We do have a few takeaways. I don't know if you've had a chance to read those
that would be great
or
to
not.
Name out, yes. Well, let's just quickly look at the takeaways just for a quick moment, and then it looks like we're okay to go with that meditation. So some of the takeaways are, have other people had a chance to be reading
Sounds
them?
good.
I guess they have, haven't they?
Yeah, I've
And
been
copying them
copying
for me,
them for
yes.
you separately, but
Okay, well then I
everyone
don't need
else
to read
has
them.
seen them.
That would just be silly. Okay, great takeaways though. I love I like that people have picked up on the spirit sightings and the three circle image for our spiritual journey. That's just so significant for me, so that's nice. Evolutionary enlightenment, appreciate the links to that. Yes, I've done a lot of reading of Bruce Sanguine, and I've actually studied with a lot of the same teachers that Bruce has studied with. Um, Craig Hamilton being one of them. Bruce and I both have, I'm pretty sure Bruce has worked with him, but Bruce and I have both worked with a number of the same people. I see their teachings showing up in his writings, so I too always appreciate that from him. Okay, so as we think about some of those takeaways, here's another one that I just came across the other day. It's this idea of we space. I lost my, where'd it go? There it is. We space by a teacher under the name of Jeff Carrera. I found him in connection with the work of Andrew Cohen. He talks about how we need to be in we space, and of course that's what we're trying to create in small groups. How we need to be in we space. Our lives need to be focused on that, our personal lives as well as the way we engage with the world. When we focus on we rather than us and them, when we make a commitment to we space, it becomes a way of coming together where he says every single person explodes into the fullness of who they've always been. Every single person explodes into the fullness of who they've always been. And he asks the question, why would we want people being together not being who they really are? So in we space, I'm going to do this teaching first and then we'll do the experiential learning. In we space, we are all on the inside, knowing that we're working together. When things get challenging in a group, it's tempting to step outside and look back and say, you guys, you're the problems. You're the ones that are screwing things up and messing things up. When we step outside, we take the position of being non-related. We make others be responsible rather than seeing ourselves as part of the circle who carries the responsibility. When we are committed to being part of the we understand and behave like we are all in this together. So we space is something like small groups. It's something that it is actually more helpful to try to experience rather than think about it. So let's do an experience-based inquiry into we space just for a few moments. So I invite you to begin by sitting quietly for a moment. Just becoming aware of yourself and your inner being again. And there in that quiet, think about a group that matters to you. It might be your family or your congregation. This circle of fellow travelers, the United Church of Canada, could be as broad as the world. So think about that group that really matters to you. And deep inside of yourself, let yourself find your inside position of being in a we space with that group. See yourself choosing to stand in we space, to feel connected and committed to this group at a profound level. Find the we inside you. Find the experience and notice what it feels like. Now imagine yourself with a group that matters to you, that group that you've been thinking about, and all of you are inside the we together. Feel how good that feels. Now turn and look out at the world from that perspective of standing together in the we space. How does it feel to be looking together at life around you? Get a good imprint right down to the very marrow of your bones of the we experience. This is a place where all is welcome. Joy, anger, concern, insights, creativity, differences. And we can trust we can bring all that because we are all committed to we. We won't leave and attack with our anger from the outside unless things become abusive and unable to be dealt with. But we commit to seek to stay together and not move outside and attack with anger. We are committed to we space. And in that we space we see each person. And notice how we see each other differently than the culture sees it. We're not in competition with each other. We don't have to be in a place of fear or in a place of protecting ourselves. But rather, when we're truly living in a we space, we're working together in cooperation, openness, connection from deep within. So feel how that feels. Now I'm going to ask you to flip that experience and see what the opposite experience feels like. So be there in the circle and how good it feels to be in that we space together with this group that really matters to you. And now take a step outside of the we. Turn the others into a them. Look at them from outside. How do you feel about them? How do you feel about yourself on the outside? Let yourself notice the distinction between the two experiences. And then let yourself step back into we. And allow yourself to imagine what it would be like to be with people who agreed to stay on the inside as we work together, so that we could really work together. What would that feel like in the significant places and groups in your life? What would that feel like if we could practice that enough so that it expands to the wider world, so that we can work together, knowing that we are one? We space. If you have any comments on that, I'd love to hear it. I'm thinking of using it in church this Sunday. So if you have some thoughts, that'd be good to hear your feedback. We space, the coming together in significant, committed community. I'd like to close my sharing part tonight with something that Rob Dalgleish, the executive director of EDGE, wrote for me around the power and importance of small groups that are circles of transformation. He says, starting there in the second paragraph on the PowerPoint, the capacity to form spiritually formative community is arguably the pearl of great price the Church has to offer to postmodern Canadian society. However, our capacity within the United Church to respond to the deep yearning of people for an experience of the divine is being shown to be tragically weak. So we need to explore how we can more deeply and more effectively foster spiritually transformative community. We live in a time of epic struggle for life in the earth, in our communities, and in the hearts and minds of each one of us. Into the tragedies of our time, God speaks, "Behold, I am doing a new thing. Even now it springs forth. Can you not perceive it?" The question for the Church is precisely that. Can we perceive the great work of God in this decisive moment in human history? We live in the midst of the great emergence of spirit for the sake of life. We so need the capacity to hear God's invitation, to see God's work and embrace it, to feel the pull of God's invitation to be the changes that can open community to God's new way. Urgently, we need to rediscover the capacity for a deep engagement with God as individuals and as communities of faith. May it be so. Amen. Let it be so.
Thank you very much, Karen, for that engaging opportunity, for the sharing of insights and allowing us to participate in a small way, in a small group um, of people gathered here. And I know I echo the sentiments of many, and I know we have all have some takeaways to take back and encourage the transformative experience in our
Thank you.
own small groups that we're involved in. So we do have a few questions, and it is after 9 o'clock. Sharon, we had the intro with Sharon the first half hour tonight, so I apologize. But Karen, you could have picked two people with more different names that might have helped me out. We have 4 questions. It's after 10 in some parts of the country. Yes, that's very important. So for those of you who need to go to bed or to other things, we certainly welcome you to leave at any time. Karen, we have 4 questions. 3 of them are pretty quick, and my suggestion would be if you can deal with those. One is about the PowerPoint being made available afterwards and how you might like to do that. I don't know if you'd like to provide people with your email address. That might be one way, but there are certain quotes and photos that certain people are looking for. Maybe if they want to, there you go, send you an email. I will suggest that you email Karen if you would like a copy of the PowerPoint, and you can figure it out. I know the PowerPoint's large, but we did manage to do it over email, so I know that whatever you're looking for, she should be able to give you. So we'll cross that particular question off. One of the other questions was about the RESPECT acronym, whether that is in the handouts.
Okay.
And then the third question, I'll just read them to you so people know what we've got, is if you teach meditation as a spiritual practice in your congregation. Perhaps a brief response to that one. And then there's a longer one that Anne has asked, and she did acknowledge it was longer, so I think after you've done those 2 that are relatively shorter, perhaps those who are interested in Anne's question can stay around. Otherwise, perhaps just
Okay,
Anne.
am I back on? Can you hear me? Okay, so the RESPECT acronym is not in the handouts. I just came across it the other day from a report that was done by our group that went to More Than Franchises, but it is on the PowerPoint. So if you'd like that particularly, I can send you that one slide or lift it and send it to you as a quote. Do you teach meditation as a spiritual practice in your congregation? We actually had a meditation service that happened every week for 9 years. So meditation is very much a part of the life at St. Paul's. Rarely is it used in the 10:30 service, but periodically. And we also have Buddhists come in and teach it. We have the Aurelia Meditation Circle there. We have a weekly meditation group that gets together, actually 2. So yes, we do teach it. Then the long question, in case people want to stay for this one, from Anne. She's sharing how we started a small group ministry last year. We had a wait list for the groups. It was so popular. Now this year we have very few people signing up. Is that a natural pattern of ebb and flow? I'd probably want to have a longer conversation with you about that, Anne, to see if we can maybe pinpoint what happened there. But there is a flow of small groups. There is an ebb and flow of small groups. We are certainly not seeing quite as many small groups now as we did in the beginning. We're not seeing it as the entry point for a lot of new people. I think we've gotten fairly comfortable in it. So I know there is that ebb and flow, but what would happen after a year? I don't have a clear sense of what that might be, so it might be good to have a little bit more conversation. And there's been another question come in. And maybe we can actually talk, or maybe we can talk after everybody else hangs up, and anybody who wants to stay for that question, you could stay for it. Then we have Joe's question. I saw it here a moment ago. What does the invitation to small group ministry sound like? The invitation. I can actually, can I do this? I think I can actually send you booklets that we've prepared that describe small group ministry. We have, and I'm not sure if I'm on the right track here, Joe. Help me if I'm not. Uh, we, in the beginning years, we did a really extensive intentional times of inviting people to small groups by having small group leaders describe their small groups in worship, by having small group fairs, by having a booklet that describes small groups. And we would invite people to, the very first invitation was to people to, would they come and explore what small group ministry experience is like and possibly consider leading a small group themselves. And when we first extended that invitation, we just basically tapped people on the shoulder and invited them to come and be part of a small group. And that worked extremely well, was to start there with that invitation. And then as more people had the experience of small group, it really works much more as a grassroots, even though we put it in the bulletin and all those kinds of things. It's much more grassroots where people invite other people to come in and participate on a topic that they really enjoy, that they think somebody else might enjoy. I always tell the small group leaders, don't ever depend on getting a full group from just putting an announcement in the bulletin. You need to be out there talking about it. So I don't know if that touches it, Joe, or not, but that's my first thought to that question. So it looks like some folks are signing off.
Well, thanks for that. Thanks for that, Karen. I've given permission for those that need to leave, and we are kind of tapering off in a way that's a bit unusual for a webinar. But again, for anyone that needs to leave, please feel free. And thank you so much for participating tonight. Anne is suggesting a longer conversation with you, Karen. She has worship committee meetings. So one person's heading to bed at 10 o'clock and someone else at the western end of the country is just starting their evening. So certainly one of the benefits of this kind of format of a small group is the ability to reach people across the country. So it's 6 o'clock. That's right. So Anne, perhaps I'll suggest, I don't know how many minutes you have now, but that you email Karen and you can set up a time to connect that way.
Bye. Yeah, that works fine for me, Anne. I actually have several calls this week with folks who are interested in discussing small group ministry. So I'm open to that. You're welcome.
Well, for those of you still here, feel free to share this with anybody that you
Great.
Well, for those of you still here, feel free to share this with anybody that you know that would be interested. The recording will be available within the next week. And also we welcome your feedback if you have a minute to fill that feedback form out.